Live now is the Environment Minister, Tanya Plibersek. Thanks so much for your time. We didn't see the whole speech there. Peter Dutton, among other things, said that essentially your government is a renewable zealot, one of the most interventionist governments in Australian history. Is any of that untrue?
Give me a break, Laura. The previous government had a decade to come up with an energy plan for Australia. They had 22 goes at it. They didn't land a single one. We saw 4 times more dispatchable energy leave the East Coast grid than enter the grid. They had years of warning that prices were going up. In fact, Stuart Robert, the previous energy Minister, hid those price rises before the last election. Gas prices for industry went up by 420% on the watch of the previous government. And now, after a year in opposition, Peter Dutton thinks he's got an answer. He actually voted against energy price support for Australian businesses and homes, $3 billion worth of energy price rebates. He voted against that. So I'm not convinced that if he couldn't come up with a plan in a decade, that he's suddenly got a plan now.
I forgot Stuart Robert was the minister in charge there. He can add that to his CV. Look, this is a bit of product differentiation from the opposition leader. Absolutely. And I think the first big foray into that, if you like. We know there's always been differences between the major party when it comes to energy, but where is the Labor government headed on this? Because we know there was an increase essentially on tax for super profits in the gas industry. There's this cap in the gas industry as well. What's the philosophical view? Going further, super profits tax on mining, so the Australian people get a bigger share of those, what we have seen is eye-watering profits in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, I think it's Peter Dutton who's focused on the sort of philosophical debate here. We're focused on the practical impacts of a decade of inactivity under the previous government, pushing up prices. If we had started energy transition a decade ago, imagine how much more energy independent we'd be now. Imagine the sort of lower prices we'd be able to share with homes and businesses now if we'd started this transition a year ago. So when it comes to the petroleum resources rent tax, of course, we've seen a modest increase recently. That was a recommendation of an inquiry begun by the previous government, and it's to make sure that Australians get a fair price for the resources that we all own. I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that Australians want to see a return on the minerals that lie beneath our grounds and in our waters. That's just fair enough. And when it comes to renewables, we've said we want to see 82% renewables in our energy grid by 2030. The reason is they're cheaper as well as being cleaner. There's a reason that millions of people have put solar panels on their roofs. It's not because they're all raving greenies, it's because they've worked out that it'll save them money. And that's true of our grid as well. We've got to spend $20 billion because of the previous government's inactivity on upgrading our grid to make sure that it's fit for purpose to receive the renewable energy that private sector businesses are building all the time. They want to put more renewables into the grid, and we've got to upgrade it because it was left without the capacity to accept all those renewables by the previous government.
Just on the PRRT, and maybe it's not that instrument, but is your government open to going further on that, looking at these enormous profits in the resources sector and actually getting more taxpayer funds, more money back to the Australian public via that vehicle or something else?
Well, no, I think the Treasurer was very clear that this was a modest increase in the amount that Australians receive for our resources, and the industry itself, for the most part,
point, though, isn't
said,
it?
Yeah, well,
it's modest. Why not go further?
Well, Peter Dutton's got all sorts of notions about, our ideological approach here. We're not interested in ideology. We're interested in energy security. Of course, we've got to protect our environment. We want a practical way forward. We want to continue to see investment that is good for the nation, that is environmentally sustainable as well. He can get caught up in some, Reagan-era ideological war. We're getting on with making sure that Australian homes and businesses have the energy they need. And my role in all of that as Environment Minister is to make sure that that energy comes in a way that is most environmentally sustainable.
There was $2 billion in the budget for hydrogen, supporting what is really an unproven technology at this point. It has enormous potential. But why commit $2 billion of taxpayer funds? Why not just leave this up to the private sector to develop?
Well, because Australia can be a renewable energy superpower if we get to the front of the pack on hydrogen. And we know that other countries are investing in their own domestic hydrogen industries. So we're in a competition for global investment in hydrogen. If you look at the money that has been set aside in the United States, for example, to attract these big international opportunities to the US, we're in that same competition. This could be an absolute game changer for Australia. We want to continue to be an energy exporter, and hydrogen and products like green steel, green aluminium, industrial chemicals that are very energy intensive to produce. If we can produce them in a way that is carbon neutral, we've got the world at our feet. We've got markets that will be falling over themselves to welcome those products. So Australians know that this can be an absolute game changer for us, as can things like the domestic battery industry that we're proposing, using our critical minerals instead of just shipping them off unprocessed, actually processing here in Australia. We need to be ahead of the curve on the energy transition. That means jobs, it means cheaper power here in Australia, and it means jobs for Australians.
You were a hero 2 weeks ago when you rejected 2 coal mines, and then all of a sudden villain last week when you approved one. How are you striking that balance, and are you open to some of the Greens' calls for having changing the legislation and there needing to be a climate trigger?
Well, I make every decision on a case-by-case basis based on the law and based on the information in front of me. And I'm not going to be swayed either way by, any sort of commentary from the outside. I have a responsibility as Environment Minister to make decisions in the best interests of the environment, and I've got a set of legal parameters that I need to work within. I'm not afraid to reject coal mines when I have to. I rejected Clive Palmer's proposed coal mine in central Queensland because it would have had unacceptable impacts on the reef. As you said, I cancelled 2 a couple of weeks ago, and then last week I approved a small mine. That's because the science and the law dictated that it should go ahead.
Tanya Plibersek, always good to have you on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Laura.